How's it going, Eliminators? Today, we're going to be doing a very quick video on why preventative maintenance on your snowblower is extremely important, even if it's a couple or a few years old. So with that being said, let's get right into it. So I have a Husqvarna that came into the shop over the weekend here, and this is a 2017 model. So this snowblower is only 3 years old, and the model of this blower here is an ST224 Husqvarna. And one of the issues was my customer said that the drive didn't work, and he noticed that he had snapped a cable, which we're going to get into in a moment. And basically he just brought it in and he had ordered a drive cable and said that he wanted me to replace it. So I'm going to be getting into why preventative maintenance is so important, because it turns out that it isn't the drive cable that was the issue. So at the back of the unit here, we have the handlebars, and this is your auger control. There's a good amount of tension there, and this is your drive control, and there's also a good amount of tension there. Now you're going to notice that there's two levers in the middle here. Now this one is to operate the up and down of the chute deflector there, and this one over here is your gear shifter. And when I move that, there's absolutely no tension on that at all. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this up and we'll have a look underneath. So with the unit flipped up here is that shift lever, and you guys can see that here is the cable that ended up breaking right there, frayed end, so that cable completely snapped off. Now my customer had ended up getting a drive cable, and right away I said it's the wrong cable, so he was able to return that to the store. What I've done is on the bottom of this snowblower, I've gone ahead and removed the 4 3/8 bolts holding this access panel on, and it is the shifter cable that ended up breaking, but it doesn't come down this way. It actually comes down at the front there, and I'm going to show you just how the cable routes. First of all, the cable right here routes back to right here, and there is unfortunately some damage you guys can see there. We're going to get to that in a bit, but this right there is the plastic conduit that the cable runs down. That runs all the way down here, and then it comes down here. Now normally there's going to be a plastic clip that goes around the post there to hold all the cables together. I have since removed that for this video, but anyways, this cable goes all the way down to the side of the snowblower here to this little post, and then the cable goes in, and the cable makes contact with that black arm that you guys can see right there. Now the cable has a lot of slack on it because again it broke. So with the access panel off, we can see the underside of the machine. Here is our friction wheel. Here is our shifter hex shaft here. And on this model, it doesn't have a dual fork. It just has one very strong one there that controls the shifting. And that goes back to a very large return spring. And we're going to be talking about that very shortly. But the arm in which that shifting cable on the other side hooks up to comes right out of here, right? So it's going to be on the other side of this shaft. And then when you shift into 6th gear, this friction wheel is going to push over this way. And then if your cable does break, they've thought this one out, that return spring will always return your snowblower into reverse. So basically you can get the machine home if you had to, which unfortunately is what my customer had to do. He was a couple houses over, the cable broke, and he still had reverse, so he had to drive it home in reverse. Now you guys might be wondering why a shifter cable would snap on a machine that is only 3 years old. And I'm going to give you my professional opinion here. You see this hex shifter shaft right here? Well, we're gonna try to wipe that and check that out. Apart from a little bit of grayish, kind of maybe anti-seize that they put on from the factory, that hex shifter shaft is completely bone dry. So what's going to happen is once that dries out, especially in colder weather, this friction wheel is going to move over much harder. And I am fighting the force of that big spring, which I'll talk about in a minute, but you guys can see that even pulling on this thing is, quite difficult, and it even got stuck right there. You just saw that, and I had to force it back into the farther reverse position, and obviously I'm getting some gunk on the friction wheel, but I'll clean that up. Now, in order to fix this, I have to go ahead and order parts, and unfortunately, a lot of parts are back ordered now because lots of people are working from home or they're laid off. it's you know, kind of a terrible thing. I was told maybe 1 to 2 weeks on parts from Husqvarna, which isn't that bad, but we have to address not just the cable, but also this right here. So I'm gonna end up going ahead and taking this out, but you guys are gonna notice that the plastic cable, well, it's held in by this pin here, and that just goes through the other side. It's gonna be hard to see, but I can tell right away that, you know, this machine would have been incredibly difficult to shift, because the drier that this hex shifter shaft gets, the harder it is to shift. And you're not only fighting against the spring tension, but at that point, you're gonna be fighting against the lack of lubrication. Now, you guys have seen in the past, when I go ahead and lubricate that with low temperature grease, these things slide like butter, and you know, it's awesome. When you go to shift, it shifts nice and freely, as it should. So what happens is you're overloading these little tiny cables, right? And it's just too much for the cable. And unfortunately, on this design, the cable conduit hooks up under the dash to that plastic piece, and you guys can see it's broken there. So unfortunately, I have to replace the entire upper dash assembly, that's called the base console, and I have to replace the cable itself, and then go ahead and address the issue of improper lubrication. So what I'm gonna do is take a wire wheel and get all of that anti-seize or whatever it is off of that hex shifter shaft, and then go ahead and lubricate it with low temp grease, clean the friction plate, and also wipe down and clean the friction wheel. And then this should work pretty flawlessly. It should shift nice and easy. So a repair that could have been a simple cable replacement has now gotten into a console replacement. And you guys can see just how much stuff is hooked up, springs and cables and all these other cables that are going around. You guys can see just how many cables are on this unit. Whereas something like, let's say, an older Craftsman or MTD unit, they would have had this, you know, been made out of metal. And at which point I would have been able to go in with like a flat bar, drill a hole in it, and then, you know, put a couple welds there, and that would have been that. I would have just been able to replace the cable, and, you know, you could have used a bolt. But because this is plastic, I now have no other choice than to go ahead and replace the base console. And that's a, you know, fairly big job, because I now have to remove and strip down everything from this console and then swap it onto the new console, which I'm gonna go ahead and give you some part numbers and pricing just so that you're aware of that. Okay, so I have an illustrated parts list for the model ST224. Here is the product number off of our machine, and this is the serial number just for reference. So I'm gonna flip this over here. I've already printed out 2 pages for the cable section and then also for the console section. So on this particular IPL, or illustrated parts listing, we're looking for number 3. So you can see that's the shifter cable right there, and then that runs down to the shifter arm. So number 3 is going to be a 588-1223-01. They call it a cable control speed, I guess. And that part lists for about $16. Because I get it direct, I can give my customer a little bit of a break on that. And then flipping over, we kind of get lucky because these 2 plastic console covers are split, right? They're not necessarily one piece, so I don't have to go ahead and remove the headlights out of this housing. However, depending on the design and how things are put together, I may have to remove this to get that off. I'm not too sure. I haven't gotten that far just yet, but you're going to notice that this is number 1 on the diagram. And then coming over here, the part number for the console base is going to be a 5811312-04. And here's something interesting. The console base, okay, with heated switch cutout, because this model that I'm working on has the heated hand grip switch. This number has been superseded from an 04 to a 12. So it is now a 581131212. And you guys can see that the MSRP on that is about $57. So I'm not too sure whether they had issues with that shifter cable breaking that piece of plastic up under here. But it is a superseded part, which tells me that something has changed, and I'm hoping they've reinforced that plastic area there. Now, you guys saw a couple of those negative reviews that I posted up on screen there. So my customer isn't alone in having to deal with these issues, and unfortunately what I'm seeing is that a lot of these failures are happening just after the warranty. So 3 years and 2 weeks or 3 years and 2 months, it doesn't matter, they're all happening right around the same time. And it's unfortunate, but there's so much twisting force at this location there that it just goes ahead and snaps those plastic retainers on that console that hold this shifter cable into position. So I just wanted to let you know that this isn't a one-off issue. It looks like it's a design flaw basically. And also there is a link that I will provide in the description and down below in the comments to the forum where you'll see just how many people are having this same issue. And I just wanted to add this in because once I go ahead and get the new console, I will do an update video just to see if they did go ahead and reinforce that plastic area where it holds in this cable. And just reading through the manual here in the maintenance schedule under lubrication, look how small this is right here. There's not a lot of text. Basically, it just says keep it well lubricated, and it says at the beginning of each season or every 25 hours of use, apply a small amount of white lithium grease to the interlock bosses. Those are going to be your levers, and then it says your pivot points here, and then it says obviously engine oil. It makes no mention of lubricating the hex shifter shaft underneath, and this has kind of gone from importance of maintaining your snowblower, doing preventative maintenance, to a design flaw video, just because, how bad is that, right? It doesn't even tell you to lubricate it. And I read online in one of those forums talking about this machine that someone else said somewhere in the manual, it says that these snowblowers have what's known as lifetime lubrication on the shifting components, which is absolutely the craziest thing I've ever heard. Now, I tried to find that specific text in the manual, but I couldn't find it. I'm just going to have to take that person's word for it. But it's clear that they use just a little bit of anti-seize on that shifter shaft, and in colder weather, anti-seize can kind of gum up and become extremely hard, and it almost is going to bind things up. We have to remember that an anti-seize is just something to prevent seizing. It is not a lubricant. Whereas, on anything that's going to be rotating or sliding, you want to be using a lubricant such as the Mystic No. 2 Low Temp Extreme Grease. I bought this at Canadian Tire. This stuff isn't that expensive, and it is quite possible if my customer were to have brought this unit to me, I would have been able to clean off all of that anti-seize on the shifter shaft, put a little bit of this on, and possibly prevented an expensive repair bill, because again, now we're just 2 months out of warranty and Husqvarna will not cover those parts. Because as you guys can see, this plastic is incredibly flimsy. And, again, going back to the hex shifter shaft down here, the drier it is, the harder it makes it to move that left and right and shift gears. And then, obviously your cable would normally be the weakest link, but on this particular design, it appears that the outer plastic edge here is going to be the weakest spot because it's going to be putting a lot of twisting force on that, whereas the inner piece, it seems to be, larger, so I'm guessing it has more reinforcement. You guys can see this one comes all the way down here, whereas this one just stops right about there. Like I said, at this point, because it's plastic, I can't weld anything, and I wouldn't want to try to repair that because then I wouldn't be able to give my customer a guarantee, which is why at this point I suggested getting a new console, and then I can go ahead and swap that, and then I can, like I said, replace that cable, go ahead and clean the gunk off of the shifter shaft, and then lubricate it properly with low temperature grease, and this issue should not happen again. So just to wrap things up, my customer is now looking at about, let's say $60 for the console, $15 for the shifter, and I also had to pay $15 for shipping because I didn't place a large enough order to qualify for free shipping from Husqvarna, which means my customer is now looking at $90 just in parts, and that $90 in parts doesn't even include the labor that it's going to take for me to remove and disassemble the old console and then reassemble and install the new console. So you have to take that into consideration. And I told my customer that I wasn't comfortable giving him an hourly quote for that job because I've never had to do one. I'm just gonna record my time taking it apart and putting it back together, and then, you know, charge him accordingly for that labor. And one of the big things that is quite unfortunate is I said this machine was a 2017 unit. It's 3 years old, and unfortunately, it is 2 months out of warranty. So if this issue would have happened 2 months ago, then I would have been able to warranty that top console and that cable, most likely, because when I ran the part number for that console, it came up as an OEM warranty part. So I'm assuming that my customer isn't the only one that's had this issue, and it's happened to some other people as well. But I just wanted to go ahead and make this video. I know I said I was going to do a valve video this weekend, but I haven't had the time. The shop has been pretty crazy. We've gotten a bunch of equipment in, and I'm also waiting on parts for quite a bit of stuff because there's a lot of stuff that's back ordered, including the parts that I ordered for this machine. You know, I'm hearing 1 to 2 weeks or 2 to 4 weeks on a lot of parts that I've been ordering. And at the end of the day, I just can't control stuff like that. So the parts are on order for this machine. I just have to wait now. But with this being such a new machine and having such a big issue like this, I thought it was a great chance to get it on video and share it with you guys. So that's going to be it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed the video, think about leaving me a thumbs up. You know, it really helps me out. You can click here to subscribe and click over here to watch one of my previous videos. I upload every single week, so be sure to stop on by next week, check the channel out for new content. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.